very interesting to us. We saw this about 10 months ago, where nation-state bad actors were using multiple hacktivism groups, like an open source, kind of crowdsourced to solve problems, getting thousands of engineers, thousands of people in these nation-states to help figure out how do you breach it. And that's scary because, just think about the velocity to be able to go do something. It's not 10 people sitting in a room somewhere. It could be up to, several thousand.
Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and defending our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Salufo, and this week I have the privilege to sit down with Barry Mainz. Barry is CEO of Forescout Technologies, a leader in securing IT, OT, and IoT devices. Barry comes to the job with tons of experience in the cybersecurity, IT, and software environment, 25 plus years. Most recently, prior to joining Forescout, was COO at Malwarebytes and has been running tech companies for a long time. Joined Forescout in 2023 and really excited to sit down with Barry today. Barry, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I thought we'd start from the start. I mean, you're 2.5 years into the job, and I'd be curious what you thought you were coming into as to where you are, what excites you, what maybe keeps you up at night. I thought we'd start there.
Good question, because I think anytime you start, there's always the things that are probably way better than you thought they were, and there's probably stuff that is not as good as you thought they were.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of context, I worked at Crosspoint Capital, private equity firm that was part owner of, and still is, Forescout, and worked there for a while, and then all of a sudden, hey, Barry, you'd be a great fit for CEO of Forescout. And you asked me why I started, what excited me about it. What excited me about it was that they were the only company that I knew in cyber that had a really good perspective, and we didn't call this zero trust back then, but this whole notion of a zero trust platform for both IoT, OT, and IT devices, and being able to do that in this sort of network security operations perspective. And I love the customer list. It was, museum quality customers, largest customers in the world, both public and private. And the notion that when I talked to customers before I joined, they said, you're really not only helping us protect patients in a hospital, you're protecting dollars in whether it's insurance companies or it was financial institutions. And you know what? I talked to some of the federal government customers and they were like, you're really making a difference. And so it was really good for me to get behind a company that not only was doing things, interesting, but also helping us.
Awesome. And there have been some news. Wall Street Journal had a piece not too long ago about a potential of Forescout Technologies going public again. Anything you want to share on that?
Well, what I will share is probably shouldn't let the facts get in the way with a good story because that's what was communicated. But look, I think we did a momentum release around our success. We made some very large customer wins. We had some, brilliant deals in the last year and a half.
Knock on wood.
And, I think profitability, terrific P&L. One could make the connection that might happen. Now, I didn't say it wasn't there, but our goal is to make a world-class solution and continue to solve, really tough business problems, delight our customers, partners, and help our prospects become customers. And, I think what happens.
Awesome and exciting, and it's trending in the right direction. That's the bottom line, however it ends.
That's exactly right.
And good for you. I thought we'd start with, you guys came out with a report recently on hacktivism, and lots of interesting, not just anecdotal, but actual empirically based evidence around that. And I thought we'd start with A, what your initial thoughts around the findings were, and then B, sort of given events in the Middle East and given events between Iran and Israel and elsewhere, Iran fit in and IRGC enabled proxies fit into this report. Let's start with the report itself. What should our audience and viewers and listeners know?
That's a really interesting question. It really gives a good example of sort of cyber being the new battlefield. And you can sort of see nation states taking advantage of critical infrastructure that's dated. And, you can pick a whole host of things that have happened. Many people know about the Salt Typhoon or Vault Typhoon or any of the things that happened in the Colonial Pipeline. These are great examples of the same exploits that we read in the report. And we see also something that's very interesting to us. We saw this about 10 months ago, where nation state bad actors were using multiple hacktivism groups, like an open source, kind of crowdsourced to solve problems. And simple things that we would maybe not think about, but a PLC, for example, like a programmable logic controller, which you would use to hack in to control something, right? Well, here it is. Here's the manufacturer. Here's the situation that we're looking at, and getting thousands of engineers, thousands of people in these nation states to help figure out how do you breach it. And that's scary because, just think about the velocity to be able to go do something. It's not 10 people sitting in a room somewhere. It could be up to, several thousand, and using it to go and do bad things to infrastructure.
And some plausible deniability, right?
Exactly
so if
right.
you get caught with your hand in the cookie jar, you can say it's not me.
Yeah, exactly right. Hey, you know what? We don't control those folks. Hey, that just happened.
I may be dated on this, but when you looked at Russia, for example, they would turn to criminal enterprises to do their bidding. And in return, they basically let them have free reign when they're not doing their bidding. China, it's a little bit of moonlighting. You had some of the PLA officers who were also trying to moonlight and make some money. So they don't all look the same, right?
No, they don't. And I think some people have better marketing than others. Certain of the nation states are, whatever you call them, I think it's the same. You can see, Iran didn't try and protect it because I think they said, hey, we may be wrong, but we're not confused. This is what we're doing. So I think it's a little less, but you see the marketing happening, whether it's, Russia talking about, hey, those are people that we don't know and they're going after financial gain, or China saying, hey, it's not really, but, I think if you go look, I think it's all the same.
And the potential for escalation makes that also a little frightening, right?
It does.
I mean, because it's hard to discern who's the puppet, who's the master.
That's right. Now, the good news is, we can actually stop a lot of those breaches.
Boom.
And, I think our cyber community of software companies and companies like Forescout, we can actually protect critical infrastructure from this happening. And so I don't want it to all be doom and gloom like, there's nothing to have, but we can. And I think it's just making sure we recognize, hey, let's take a look at these studies. Let's make sure we understand where they're coming from, what sort of devices, the coordination behind it. And then we can go say, okay, great, what are we going to go do about it?
And what I like about it is it's not only descriptive, but it is prescriptive. And we'll jump to some of those solution sets in a second. But one of the things that surprised me is just the emphasis on water systems, for example, and OT. And I have to underscore, Forescout's always been in the forefront of operational technology, which has sort of been the stepchild or the Rodney Dangerfield of the cyber community for too long, but not anymore. That's where life, death, actually, real consequences are focused on that. But I'd be curious in terms of the targets that you were able to glean from your most recent study. Water seemed very high on the list.
Yeah, so water and water processing plants, energy tend to have the oldest or dated infrastructure. And they also have technology where they said, hey, I've got a particular system, and I'm going to go make it smart. And maybe they made it smart by connecting it to the internet, say 10 years ago, and maybe didn't have any of the protocols that we have, IPv4, IPv6, none of those. And I know for a fact some of the systems in the report there, they were IPv0. So it makes it very easy for them to be breached. You mentioned something earlier about the difference between IT and OT. The people involved. I mean, those systems are lockdown systems. In many cases, the people that are running them, they don't know how to change them. There's no patch and vulnerability built in, meaning like, hey, I can automatically update and change something. There just isn't in those systems.
Many of them have been around for 30 plus
This is exactly
years.
right. And I'll tell you a little bit. I don't know, we didn't talk about the background, but I was at Wind River Systems, and we did embedded. When I first started there, it was embedded, then it was smart embedded, and then it was IoT. And we were 2,000 employees, $500 million in revenue, and we basically worked in mostly regulated industries providing software to control those systems. And I can tell you that given how fractured the ecosystem is to create a device or a SCADA and or a manufacturing system or a power system, very, very decentralized. And what ends up happening is put stuff together and it's going to work. We're thinking about, oh, this thing's here today. We're not thinking about hacktivism 20 years ago. We're not thinking about, kind of crowdsourcing a PLC breach. We're not thinking about any of that. I was there. And I have to fast forward when I started at Forescout, so going from Wind River, probably 10 years.
Which was an Intel company, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
We got bought by Intel.
Yep.
Fast forward the Wind River, to now I'm at Forescout. We saw about a year and a half ago, and we have a Videri Labs, which does all the research that article you're talking about was published from. We go look about the breaches, and we have a whole set of reports around what sort of devices, what's the operating system, et cetera. About a year ago was the first time in 9 years an embedded operating system was number one.
Wow.
And this is where we realized, hey, this is a trend. Yeah. And we can see where those breaches were coming from. The same, bad actors in these particular nation states. And we could start to see their devices. And guess where they started? Water, energy, kind of the old systems that were been there 15 to 20 years. And it's only gotten worse over time in the last year or so.
And really good point and good historical sort of background. But on top of all that, you're starting to see malware that's specifically targeting OT systems, right?
Absolutely.
And that does change the game a little bit as well. So
exactly. And malware written for a particular PLC
and a particular device
a particular system, right? Or device. And you go look at it and you're like, somebody had to go because if you look at how those devices are made, many of them are custom. And we used to say semi-custom, right? Because nothing was out of box. Everything was custom or semi-custom. And so you go look at it and they have to spend time knowing that system, that device really well to write the malware. Because the malware typically is not going to be applicable to every single one of the similar type systems. They're going to have to tweak it. So this is where it gets scary in that someone's actually paying attention to that.
And if I'm not mistaken, Forescout also does some interesting work around medical devices, right? So we think of the IT systems and the infrastructure around it, but the devices themselves, that's if you start thinking about it, it's a little concerning, no?
Yeah, it is. And we have multiple vertical markets that we solve, and primarily around regulated industries. So it would be, banking, brokerage, insurance, kind of public sector we talked about earlier, healthcare, energy, right? And you go look at these vertical markets, and healthcare is one area, and we've seen in the news, lots of breaches. And why? To your point, lots of systems there. They were made smart after the fact. They weren't secure by design. And many of them are PC-based, running Windows 95 or Windows 10 with very, very old middleware. And the hackers can go, wait a second here. We hacked those systems. That kidney dialysis machine, that's the same process we used 9 years ago. On something, or 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Yeah. We just pull out that, dust it off, and boom, I'm going to use this particular attack.
What do you think cyber defenders should take out of the recent conflict in the Gulf between Israel and Iran? And Iran has always been a pretty active actor, both in terms of IRGC themselves, but also proxies. And good thing that Lebanese Hezbollah is not the force it once was, and that was also a pretty interesting cyber. I don't know if you call it cyber, but physical cyber enabled attack.
Combo platter.
But what should defenders be thinking right now? And I like to say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but things that pop over there, wherever over there is, often are previews of a movie coming to a theater near you here. So it's not just that it's in our interest in the region. That's sort of a canary in the coal mine. Anything we should be thinking? Water concerns me in the United States, if I'm being very blunt.
I would zoom out a little bit and say, okay, before we go into the vertical markets, I would say that just the mindset. I think we have to be thinking about, hey, you can't secure stuff you don't see. So it's really about, let's start with asset visibility. Most places we go.
And that's where you started, right? That was Forescout. Initially would light up your system.
That's exactly right. Let's look at like, what do you have out there? And then the second thing is, give me a risk profile. Like, we have information, we know that certain behavior should not happen. And if that particular device is acting a certain way, we know there's a risk associated with that. So once that happens, get those two check boxes, then containment, and have policy around containment. Because it's not necessarily the fact that you're going to be able to go in and change and completely secure everything 100% of the time. What you want to do is limit the blast radius if it does happen.
And the consequences.
So you start first, let's take a look what's out there. Hey, give me a risk score. Give me some ability to do containment based on what I see on risk. And the other piece is control, right? So maybe the last thing you would go to is say, hey, we want to know, once you contain something, hey, is there an ability to do something else, like fire off a trouble ticket to go check everything else that looks like this? Or hey, maybe what we should do is update the software on this particular IT device because it'll prevent this from happening on these OT devices. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff that can happen. We do it in a practical way. I think we need to take that as an exemplar and apply that step and repeat to places like, the power grid and or, water processing plants, because oftentimes they're the last ones for tech to be deployed, whether it's, run private or public. And yet they're the ones that could potentially cause the most damage, to be fair.
Unequivocally. I sometimes am a little critical that it's become a buzzword, but resiliency is the name of the game.
Yeah, I didn't use that just because everybody uses it.
No, it's the truth. You're never going to be in a position. It's like the old counterterrorism. You're not going to protect everything everywhere all the time from every perpetrator and every modality
and that's the containment,
of attack.
Right?
Exactly.
And then so that'll help you with being resilient, because hey, if you can contain it, then that's okay, great, terrific. I can solve that littler problem, those devices, that thing, whatever it is. And then what I can do is to say, now that I know that, I can be way more resilient because I can apply that to other attack vectors.
And I would imagine before we step off sort of the good work you did around hacktivism and proxies, they also are sort of they're the first in seeking out vulnerabilities. If they get burnt, they get burnt. No skin off the ultimate puppet's back, right? And I think the better ones are probably pretty stealthy from beginning to end. Yes, no? Is that something that any research?
Yeah. Yes, because the best ones deposit their stuff and come back later.
Exactly.
And then it's like Volt Typhoon or Salt Typhoon, right? You think that, right? Where there's a big latency between when the bad actor came and did his or her stuff and when it was actually ignited.
Exactly.
And so I don't disagree with you on that. I think the other piece too is that I just think if we are logical on, hey, what do we know now? What works? And step and repeat, we can do serious progress on taking the majority off the table.
I agree with that. And that's the best we can do.
Yeah.
And the reality is we don't do enough of that. I hope we see more of that. Most people genuinely don't really pay attention until they've paid a price.
Yeah, I know. It's sort of like, and I always tell CISOs and CEOs I go talk to, I say, look, yes, it may cost you money to go do this, but you got to think about it as an investment.
Exactly.
Because every one of the times we've engaged with a large corporation and they had an issue, it was costing them way more than if they would have just bought the stuff up front.
Not to mention reputation management.
Yeah.
It's sort of like health, isn't it? I mean, the truth is to be healthy in your 80s, you got to be working on it when you're in your 50s, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
don't start running marathons
exactly.
at 79. Right? That's
exactly.
not going to help you.
And I do feel like there is a bit of a psychological argument that needs to be made. And I'm not sure we've made it yet, but I think it's starting to resonate because everyone's a target. And I think ransomware democratized that. And I think this was in your study, but you're starting to see actors, they're not just focused on one technique. You're seeing DDoS combined with ransomware, combined with all sorts of brute force types of attacks and the like. So you're starting to see organizations bundle capabilities.
That's right. Take a traditional IT attack, phishing or something, get your IT organization distracted with that, focus on something that it may make a difference, it really doesn't matter, and attack them over here on something else, because it's typically the same people that are managing that.
Exactly.
And they get distracted, to your point. So we do see that happening as a tactic for sure.
And limited time. I want to go to another I'm reminded of Wayne Gretzky. You don't want to skate to where the puck is, but to where it will be. And there's a reason he was the highest, well, now second highest. OV, I guess, broke that record. But I'd be curious, quantum and post-quantum, you've got some fascinating work in that space. Anything to start to sort of share with our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, so the good news is if I zoom out, I go look at the secular trends that I know the federal government's focusing on it. I know that large companies regulated companies are focusing on that, are these vectors. One is quantum computing, and what that does for the bad actors in terms to be combining that with agentic AI and saying, now I've got bad actors on steroids, because that agentic AI can learn, and I've got a super powerful engine behind it to go do bad things fast and very, kind of call it, it's like an elephant that can tap dance. Because you got all this horsepower behind it and pulling, like that. But you've got the ability to go do all that stuff with agentic AI. And what that does for or against encryption, because we're talking about quantum computing and quantum what happens to the crypto. We are actually launching here shortly. Maybe by the time this gets aired, it will already be launched, I'm sure. Which is whole quantum-safe Forescout.
Awesome.
And we can go and if I say one thing, and I don't say this as a kind of a sales pitch, but if your vendor you're working with, cyber vendor, doesn't have quantum safe technology built in,
game over.
Yeah, it's a problem. So we have quantum safe at the device level, so we can say, hey, that device, OT, IoT, etc., or IT device. Now, most IT devices are going to be protected, so you're going to worry about a device like we talked about earlier that's sitting out in the field for 20 years, and we can say, hey, what version of crypto is it running? Is it quantum safe? And if it isn't, tell people, so you can have a strategy for that. And we can tell when it's flipped back. So sometimes, we're going to see bad actors, and we didn't say it in this report, we're starting to see playing with crypto and flipping it back and forth from, quantum proof and then putting it back to old crypto that you can hack and coming back later, to your point. So you can actually monitor that with some policy. So that's the other piece. The other thing is that dovetails into, and we talked about critical infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Because if you have agentic AI, quantum computing, you've got a crypto, gap or, an opportunity. And then you've got your, critical infrastructure that's ripe for hacking.
Which is a huge, I mean, in many ways, and again, I love looking, history may not repeat itself, but it tends to rhyme. And in some ways, and that's Mark Twain, allegedly not me. But you think back to World War II and whether it was Enigma, ultimately, it was cryptographers and cryptologists that won the war. And if you think about it in terms of, if you have the ability to keep all of your data secret and exploit anyone else's, that has huge implications, not only from a national security standpoint, but from an economic competitiveness standpoint, from a public safety standpoint. This isn't a race we can afford to lose, is
That's
it?
right. That's right.
And I think you've done some research around quantum safe, and if I'm not mistaken, some scary findings, and I just want to make sure I get this right. Secure shell servers, 6% are quantum safe, and that's a pretty big deal on the SSH side. And then TLS traffic, less than 20%. Why does that matter, firstly? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, it matters because, it's slow, right? I mean, go look at this and say that at what point do you think that we ought to have 100%? And if you track it now, I think we're going to run into way more problems before we get done. The other piece, which we didn't say in that article, was IoT and OT devices. I can guarantee you it's way less than 1%. And the problem is that many of these have to be field updated.
Staggering.
So I'm pretty sure that people aren't going out there with a USB stick, coming out to, a manufacturing plant and, updating a KUKA robotic, robot that's sitting out there, or the SCADA system that's, plugged in there. I'm pretty sure that's not happening right now. And it's happening at a very, very, very slow pace.
And to go back to history, it was sort of where the utilities were, the grid in particular, and SCADA about 20 years ago. Because to actually address and change the default passwords alone, which were often password, would have caused brownouts, right? So in a weird way, is there a way to scale that?
Well, I think there is, right? And so I think there's first recognizing the problem. And the good news is, I've been meeting with a lot of CISOs and CEOs, been at the Aspen sort of security summit there, by Aspen Digital.
Awesome.
Was meeting here around DC area with a lot of executives.
Exactly.
And then, I spend 50-60% of my time with executives. They get it. Now, I think sometimes we have a problem moving from insight to execution. So I think the insight we understand is a problem, but I want to make sure, and I tell everyone, hey, we have an opportunity to give you a path to the execution.
Awesome.
And that, part of it is just knowing what you don't know. And then I can tell them that, we'll be thought partners and help you to the execution piece so that you're not vulnerable to these issues.
And the gap between noun and verbs is high. So, but that said, I also see in some companies and sort of the operational side, the CISOs, the CSOs, they all get it. But general counsels, government affairs, operations, they may have a different perspective or different priorities, and understandably, because they're serving customers and clients. How do we square that circle?
Well, part of it, the Disclosure Act came out in 23, and it was basically, if you were a company, and most of the companies you'd be in the definition, I think, is regulated industry, certainly publicly traded, right, et cetera, dealt with the government. There were some qualifications. Yet, if you were breached, you had to disclose not only IT devices, but you also had to disclose IoT or medical devices and OT devices. And so that's driven, I know, the conversations to say, hey, where are we exposed? And I think the most aggressive and intelligent companies are starting to think about that, and they're C-suites behind it. And like I said before, when I get to talk to sometimes I'm brought into the audit committee, which is usually not what you want to be brought into, because usually they had a hack. It's like, it's an investment, as I mentioned before. And oh, by the way, get out ahead of it. Don't sit and wait to see, are they coming back? Because they are. And there's a very, very public issue with one of our healthcare organizations. I don't need to mention it, but they were nailed 3 times before they solved the problem.
Wow. Yeah. And again, it's sort of it's the ER versus health prevention model, right? And we're still in ER mode. Yeah. And hopefully that begins to change a little bit. I'd be curious in terms of misconceptions or blind spots security teams have when it comes to preparing for the quantum world.
I think a little of that happens to be sometimes cultural lock-in, meaning that, you've got in situations where they have OT applications and systems and IT, say manufacturing, or you talked about, water treatment plants or power plants. They have very different folks on each side, very different mindset. And so it's sort of like the culture is, hey, I'm an OT, stay out of my business. Yep. I'm an IT, stay out of my business. And I think this lack of, hey, let's go and take a approach together is missing. So I see that as an issue where, culturally, they just never did that.
And one is preventing 3-mile aisles. The other, so there's one's more public safety, at least culturally, historically, but you can't have that it's all merged.
And if I have an issue, what's it going to cost me?
Exactly.
And so maybe I don't do anything because it's cheaper for me to let it happen, and then I can go fix it afterwards, which, I'm not so sure that's the best solution or best strategy. That would not
certainly
be mine.
Not from a public safety standpoint.
But that's sort of the mindset, unfortunately. So I see that. And I do see the more progressive companies. There's a very large chemical company in Germany that they've promoted their CISO, and he runs both IT and OT. And has people underneath them, and they have, it's funny. So Germany, they go out to beers. They spend time with one another. They talk. I mean, they are forcing the culture together. And I go look at that and say, okay, you can kind of laugh and say, oh, well, it's beers and pretzels, huh? But he said,
good beer and good pretzels.
Yeah, that's true. He said, we're trying to change the culture here.
Yeah.
And this is the way you do it.
Yeah.
And he's doing also having some of the systems people do, small stints in IT and vice versa so that they can change it. And that's actually really changed the velocity of them moving towards different systems and acquiring and thinking about how do they provide a cyber strategy that's going to work for both.
That's actually very insightful, because I like to say technology changes, human nature remains consistent. I do think there are some game changers like quantum, but at the end of the day, you don't want to be exchanging business cards when the bomb goes off, right? I mean, you have to know one another. You have to walk a little bit in their shoes to understand their pain point.
Right.
And there are some companies that are combining their IT and OT SOCs slowly. In the utilities space, I'm familiar with a couple, but they're the exception, by no means the rule.
Yeah.
10 years from now, how do you delineate the difference? They're all converging, right?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, I think Gartner's been saying for the last 20 years they'd be, they'll merge.
Do they have a new quadrant, actually? Because they blended all their studies into one. That would hurt their business, and maybe not.
But I do feel like we are seeing some momentum there. I do think that people are realizing that they have to change. Companies are saying we have to change. Agencies are saying we have to change. We have to go talk about both. I do feel like the other piece that I think is, good to see is that, just at least admit you have a problem.
Yeah.
And funding the right resources. I mean, we just launched an MSP for OT. And the reason why we did that was to say, hey, we're trying to help out. And, it's solving a set of business problems that, maybe there's certain companies that are trying to make the transition, or agencies that are trying to make the transition to say, hey, at some point we got to change our IT organization to help with OT. But in the meantime, hey, Forescout can help them with, OT in terms of an MSP, and make sure that they can protect their OT environment, the devices, et cetera.
Not to embarrass her, but anytime I have an OT question, I speak to one of your colleagues, Allie King. She's going to know everything about what's going on, both policy-wise and technology-wise. And I think, in all sincerity, OT is a big set of issues and fundamental from a security standpoint going forward. Barry, we're almost at the end of our time. What questions didn't I ask that I should have? And I'm actually, before I do that, I'm going to break my own rule. Agentic AI, we touched on it. Are you seeing that even from hacktivists, or is that still more APT type actors?
Yeah, exactly. APT stuff for sure. We just know because in the lab when we go look at it, and we have a consortium. They work with several other.
Invertery Labs does good work.
Yeah, Invertery Labs does really good work, but we also work with other tech companies. NVIDIA, Broadcom, et cetera, that we're all in the same boat together. And the stuff we test, we're worried about agentic AI.
Yeah.
And you can go look at the studies they've done. The government's done studies where saying, hey, do you have as a pilot better than a, agentic AI driven, pilot? And it's not quite as good, but getting better. And part of it has to do with the CPU processing that they don't have. So, hey, you can have CPUs and agentic AI to think like a human, which is awfully scary because,
smarter than me, that's for sure.
Yeah, and good Lord, some of the behavior that humans have, that's the other thing. But, we worry about it.
And I ask almost all of my national security folks, and I know it's not as simple as red, blue, who benefits from AI or agentic AI, but if you had to answer, and I think part of it is, it's always going to benefit the adversary, but it can also benefit more of the defenders. But I'd be curious what your thoughts are. Who's the big winner in that, or is it truly a double-edged sword? It's
a double-edged sword because I think that, if we move from insight to execution, meaning we think about it and then we say, okay, what are we going to go do to defend it? I think there's no reason why we shouldn't, be able to be way ahead of the bad actors, way ahead. Now, if we don't, it's going to be, we already know that they're going to start with this. We know for a fact, given, the information that we know, and certainly the federal government knows that it's already starting to happen. But I do think we can prevent it, and not 100%, but like I said, containment. You mentioned the word resiliency.
Even if you get to that 66, 80% solution, whatever it is, at least then you can focus on the hard problems, right?
Exactly.
And now I will ask, what questions didn't I ask that I should have?
Am I optimistic or pessimistic?
Good question. What is the answer? I've been told the pessimist is an optimist with experience.
I will say this. I'm happy, not satisfied. I think we've done a lot of great things as an industry. I think if I look at it, I think we can do better together. And, what makes me not satisfied is that until we don't see these bad actors breaching us, we're not there yet. And so, again, I see a lot of the right, sort of activity, but good Lord, if we don't continue that with some level of momentum, it could be pretty bad.
Really well said. That was one of the best closings we've had. So, Barry, really appreciate all your hard work. We're in this together, so let's continue to fight the good fight and onward and upward. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Cyber Focus. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. Your ratings and reviews help us reach more listeners. Drop us a line if you have any ideas in terms of topics, themes, or individuals you'd like for us to host. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay curious.